In this presentation, we will continue on in our comprehensive problem related to a not-for-profit or non-profit organization, that non-profit being a private college. We're entering the information on the left-hand side into the blue areas on the right-hand side. Last time we entered about half of the transactions related to the current period that we are working on into our trial balance worksheet. This time, we will be continuing on where we left off last time. Last time we left off on number 9. So we will be continuing on with number 9 this time. Now we're out of space here, so what we're going to do is we're going to unhide some cells first so we can go through this worksheet. There's some hidden cells you can see between I and O, so therefore we're going to select between H. I'm going to select H all the way to O. H to O, we're going to let go. Going to right click in that selected area and we will unhide that selected area. Then we're going to hide the ones that we don't really need at this point in time, that being these cells from E to I, because those are being completed. We may need them, we might have to unhide them later, but for the most part, we're going to hide them by selecting E over to I, no O or U, just E to I, and then let go, right click on the selected area and hide those cells. All right, so now we have our new working sheet, and we got number 9 right next to where we get the data, right next to where we input the data. So that's handy. That's the way we want to see it. We're going to scroll down to number 9 where we have the expenses. We're going to group all the expenses from the period into one transaction. Recorded all the expenses at one time. You can think about these as like kind of individual type of transactions if you so choose. It's very similar to a for-profit organization, so this is not where we're going to concentrate our time given that fact. Okay, so let's record these expenses. I'm going to scroll. Now, make sure that you don't record them down here. This is the closing entries, which we'll do later. Make sure you're recording them up top to the entries up here. We're in line K3. So the first one was related to instruction expense. So we'll find the instruction expense down below. There's instruction expense. The amount we're going to put in L3. So within L3, I'm going to scroll down and find that amount. That was for the $3,585,040. There is that. Scrolling back down, we want to find the academic support is going to be the next one. So I'm going to go back up and we're going to find in K4, I'm going to say equals, looking for academic support type of account in the trial balance, going to be an expense type of account. So it's going to be down below. It is in order, assets, liabilities, kind of equity or net assets, and then kind of revenue minus expenses. So academic support here, there we have that. The amount I'm going to pick up will be equal to, I'm going to scroll back down and look for that amount, and that's going to be the $2,028,000. All right, what's next? Next we have the student services. So student services, see if we have an expense related to student services. I'm going to scroll back up top. We are in cell K5 where I'm going to say equals, and scroll back down and look for an expense related to student services. There we have it in O23 and enter. And let's pick up the amount. It's going to be in L5 where I'm going to say equals and scroll back down to the student services, that $95,880 and enter. All right, scrolling back down, let's see what else we got. We've got the institutional support. So let's see if we have an expense account related to institutional support, as I'm thinking we will. So we are in K6 where I'm going to say equals, scroll back down to the institutional support expense. There we have it. And then in L6, I'm going to say equals, scroll back down, and we're going to pick up the $509,130. And then finally, the next one is going to be the auxiliary item, enterprises, and enter. And this is the expense side. We recorded the income side of things. So let's make sure you're picking up the expense side of things here. Actually, I just kind of messed up here. I'm going to delete that. We should be picking it up not from there, but from the expenses. And over here, make sure that you're picking up the auxiliary expense, not the revenue account. So this one up here is revenue. This one down here is the expense. Okay, enter. Now we'll pick up the amount, which is going to be equal to, scrolling back down, And we'll pick up the amount of the 100,510. And then we're going to credit. We're going to say that the credit is just simply going to go to cash. So the credit's going to go to cash. That's going to be on the credit side in M8, where we will say negative SUM of these amounts, and there's going to be our credit. All right, let's post this out. We're in the instruction expense. So let's go to instruction expense down below and where all the expenses are. So instruction expense is in Q21. So something's in it. So I'm going to say F2 on the keyboard plus, and then F2, and then scroll back over to pick up the amount of the 3,585,40. There we have that. The next one we're looking for is going to be the academic support expenses. So I'm going to scroll down and pick up the academic support expenses. So here we have those. I'm in cell Q22. Q22 is going to say equals. Scrolling back up for the academic support expenses. This one, 2,028,000, and enter. And then we're looking for, I believe, the student services, the 95,880. Let's pick that one up. Student services is going to be right here in Q23 equals. Scrolling back up. Student services, the 95,880, and enter. And then the institutional support, probably the next one because it's the next one on the trial balance. It is indeed the next one. So we're going to go to institutional support, Q24 equals. We'll pick up that 509,130. Next, we're going to have the auxiliary enterprise expense. So that's going to be in Q25 equals. Scrolling back over and picking up that number. And then finally, we have cash. Cash is going to be up top. So here's cash. We're in Q3. Something's in it. So I'm going to say F2 plus F2. And then pick up that credit amount and enter. So there we have that. So now we'll make sure that we are in balance here. Let's take a look at those green zeros down below, or hope there are green zeros down below. There are green zeros down below. So now we can go to the left. We can go to the next transaction, which is going to be number 10. We're going to ungreen number 9 so that we can then move on to the new one, that one, number 10. So we'll highlight number 10 or select it and make it green. And that one says, instruction provided in services related to the restricted grant. And that's going to be cash paid out. So we're going to have a transaction that's going to be cash is going out. We're going to record the expense of instruction services. However, we also have the situation that it was in conformity with the requirements of the restricted grant, and therefore we'll have to unrestrict the grant money as well. So we're going to go through that unrestricting type of process. There's going to be two transactions. The first one fairly straightforward. The second one is going to be somewhat new will be new if you're comparing a for-profit to the non-profit type of organization. Let's start off with the first one, which is going to be cash is going to be going down because we're going to be paying it, and the debit's going to go to the instruction expense. So scrolling back up top, we are now on number 10. That's number 1. We're not number 10, has a 0 behind the one after the one. So we're going to say cash is going to be on the credit. Let's record that. Cash is going down. The debit is going to be going to the instruction expense. Instruction expense is going to be the debit. The amount then, I'm going to put in L10. The debit amount will be going in L10. Scrolling down to the green one that we are on. It's going to be that 530,000. And then the credit is going to be the same amount. There's our transaction. There's our the thing we're going to record. We're going to record the instruction expense first. That's going to be down here. So we're down here. There's the account. Here's the amount in the account. We are in Q21. There's something in it. So we're going to go into it by saying F2 plus F2. Scrolling to the left and then scrolling back up, picking up that 530,000. There we have it. Next, we're going to go to the cash. So here's cash. Cash will be up top. So up top, we will go. We are in cell Q3. Within Q3, something's in it. So we're going to say F2 plus F2. Put the cursor back down and scroll over to that 530,000. There we have that. And so let's see if we're back in balance down below before we do the second component of it. Okay, we are back in balance. Let's do the second component of it. Second component is going to be that we complied or we spent money in accordance with the restriction of the grant. Therefore, we want to make sure that we unrestrict the money here. So now we're going to go through that unrestricting process. That's with these funny two accounts down below. You'll recall from prior problems where we have net assets released, satisfaction of purpose restriction without donor restriction, and then the same thing with donor restriction. Now, you want to think about these things. I would think about them as basically revenue type of accounts. In other words, they have credit balance type of accounts, and one of them's going down. The one's going up is going to be without restrictions. That's our goal. That's the goal of these two accounts, to take something that was restricted in some way, take it out of restrictions, and therefore this account is going to be going up, the one without restrictions. It's going to go up in the credit direction because it's kind of like a revenue account. Revenue accounts have credits. Going up would be doing the same thing to it, another credit. This account then is going to represent kind of like a revenue account that is going down, the one with restrictions. So it has restrictions. You can think of it as a credit kind of account. It's going down. Therefore, we're going to do the opposite thing of its natural balance, which will be a debit over here. So credit here, debit here. Let's do it. So let's do that. The debit side is going to be with restrictions. I'm going to skip a line. We can call this 10B. Let's just do that. Call it 10B. So that one's 10B. And then we're going to scroll down and we're going to pick up the net assets with donor restrictions. And then the second one's going to be net assets without donor restrictions. So that's how those go. And then the amount, it's going to be the same amount. So I'm just going to pick the same amount as the prior transaction. And there we have it. Okay, so let's record this one out. And the first one's going to be, remember that the debit is going to the one with restrictions because it's going down. So that's going to be this one. And that's in cell Q27. So within Q27, we're going to say equals, and then scroll back up to the debit of the 530,000. So there is that. And then the second one, the one without restrictions, is going to be the credit. Scrolling back down to the credit, here's the one without restrictions. We are in Q26 where we will say equals. Scrolling back up to the one without restrictions, the 530,000, enter. There we have that. And if you scroll back down, we see that we're back in balance given by the green zeros. So the trusty green zeros. Okay, so if we go back to the left, we're done with number 10, and we can move on to number 11. It's a long one, number 11. So I'm going to ungreen number 10. We're going to move on to number 11 and make that one green. So we'll make that one green. First part of number 11 says we have an allowance for uncollectible tuition and fees, which has increased by the 8,800. So we're going to record that increase. This is going to be kind of like an adjusting type of entry. I'm going to make this a lighter green so we can see which one of number 11 we are on, since it's a long one. So number 11, I'm going to go all the way up. Don't go to this closing entry, by the way. We're going to go up to the trial balance up top. We're going to be here in J16. So within J16, I'm going to say this is number 11. And what we're going to do here is increase the allowance. So we're looking for the allowance for doubtful accounts. That's going to be this item. That, recall, is a contra asset account. So it's going to be basically these are the tuitions that are collectible, but we believe that some of them won't be collectible. And therefore, we're going to estimate what that would be, similar fashion as we would in a for-profit type of organization with regards to accounts receivable. So the contra account is going to go up in the credit direction. So I'm going to put that on the bottom. Contra account going up in the credit direction. And then the debit is not going to be bad debt expense as it typically would be in a for-profit organization. We're actually going to reverse the revenue type of account directly. And that's going to be the tuition and fees without donor restrictions. So there's going to be our transaction. This top part is the thing that is typically different or will be different than a typical transaction for a for-profit type of organization using the allowance method. Then we're going to scroll down. We're going to pick up the amount down here in this green area, which is going to be that 8,800. That'll be the debit. That'll be the credit. We'll post this out then. Here's the tuition and fees without donor restrictions. That's going to be over here. We are in cell Q13. So within Q13, something is in there. So I'm going to say F2 plus F2. Scroll back over and we'll pick up that 8,800 and enter. Then we want the allowance for doubtful accounts. So the allowance for doubtful accounts, that's going to be up top. Scrolling up top, allowance for doubtful accounts is a credit balance account. It's a contra asset account. We're going to say in Q6 equals, and then scroll back down, picking up that credit of 8,800. It then goes up, bringing the book value of the receivables down. Let's see if we are back in balance down below. We are given by the green zeros. That looks good. Let's go back down to number 11 and ungreen that 8,800. Next, number 11 says the fair value of investments increased by the 13,140. Of that 13,140, the amount associated with the endowment and allocated to net assets with restrictions, therefore, is going to be that 5,440. So we're looking at these two. I'm going to make that a lighter green. So we'll say that's the one we're on, the kind of lighter green one. So that is where we are at. Going to scroll back up top. We're looking at the trial balance. Make sure you're at the top trial balance here. And we are looking at the investments. Investments then are going to be increasing. That's because there was a gain. We're going to then record the other side to the unrealized gains, which will be recorded on kind of similar to the income statement type of accounts. Down here, one without restrictions and one with restrictions. Okay, so we're going to go back up top. Investments are going to be increased. This is going to be number 11. We'll call it 11B. Investments will increase, so we're going to say that's a debit. Investments are an asset account. They will then be going up with a debit balance. Debiting the investments, and that's going to be for the full amount of that 13,000 something, I believe it was. Let's scroll down, pick it up. 13,140. And then the credit is going to go to these revenue kind of accounts, the unearned type revenues. So we got one that's going to be restricted, one that will not. I'm going to put the one with the restriction first because that's the first, we have that number. So I'm going to say the one with restrictions. This is unearned gain on investments with donor restrictions. And then this is going to be a credit. So I'm going to put it in the outer column, M20. And then I'm going to say negative to flip the sign and scroll over and pick up our number. So I'm going to scroll down, pick up our number, which is that 5,440 and enter. And then we have the plug formula, which is going to be the difference, the amount that does not have restrictions. And that's going to be our trusty plug formula, the trusty negative sum of those two numbers. That's the amount that will be unrealized gain that will have no restriction, otherwise known as without restrictions. So unrealized gain on investment without restrictions, and there we have it. There is our transaction. Let's go ahead and post this out. We're going to scroll back up top to the investments up top. So here is the investments accounts. We are in cell Q4. Within Q4, we're going to say F2 plus F2. Then scroll down and pick up our number. That being the 13,140 and enter. So investments then increasing. Then we have the unrealized gain on investments with donor restrictions. So scrolling back down, unrealized gains on investments with restrictions. That's going to be down here in Q29. So within Q29, we're going to say equals. Scroll back over and pick up that 5,440. Increasing that number in the credit direction, increasing what would be similar to the net income as well. Then we want the unrealized gain on investment without restrictions. That's going to be here, this account. So we are in cell Q28 equals, scrolling back over to that 7,700 and enter. And so we increase that amount as well. That puts us back in balance down below. So we look good to go. So I'm going to go back over to our data. We're back to the left in our data. We'll ungreen that amount related to number 11, or that part of number 11. Now we are on the last part of number 11, which is going to be the depreciation. So this is going to be depreciation that we're going to record. We're going to break it out, however, to the allocation to instruction, allocation to auxiliary enterprises, and allocation to academic support. So depreciation, as you'll recall, I'm going to scroll back up top, is going to be increasing the contra asset account of accumulated depreciation, and then it usually would be debited to depreciation expense. So we're going to have the same process here. It's related to, in our case, equipment. Property, plant, and equipment is what depreciation typically is related to. Property, plant, and equipment is going to be an asset. We're going to then record the contra asset of accumulated depreciation to allocate the value or cost of the equipment over its useful life. That means it's going to go up in the credit direction. As it does so, it brings the book value, cost minus accumulated depreciation, down. Then down below, however, we're not going to just record depreciation expense. We're going to allocate it to these categories, that being instruction expense, auxiliary enterprises, and academic support. So let's do that. We're going to say this is going to be 11. We'll call it 11C, let's say. So 11C, we're going to say this is equal to, I'm going to pick up these debits. And again, this is what's different. This is what's not depreciation expense, but these other depreciation or these other expense accounts where we are allocating. So we have the instruction expense. We have the auxiliary enterprise expense. And we have the academic support expense. Those are the three expenses we will be allocating to, and then the credit is going to go to accumulated depreciation. So we'll scroll back up top. We want to pick up the accumulated depreciation as the credit. We're going to be in the credit side. We are in cell M26. Within M26, we want to credit. Therefore, I'm going to say negative instead of equals, and scroll back down to our amount. And it's actually going to be the sum of those three. So I could say this plus this plus this. Actually, I'd have to put brackets around it. We could put brackets like so. So I added them up and then put a negative sign in front of it. It's basically the sum of those three, of course, and then and then flip the sign. Or we could do it this way. We can go to instruction expense and pick up that number, which is the 38,750. Then we're going to go to auxiliary enterprises, pick up that number. Then we're going to go to academic support and pick up that number. And then we could recalculate the accumulated depreciation as the negative sum of those three numbers. And that could be another way we can calculate that. And so there we have it. And we can post this out now. We have the instruction expense. So I'm going to scroll over to the right. We're looking for the instructional, or that's the institutional instruction expense. That's going to be in Q21. Something's in it. So I'm going to say F2 plus F2. Scroll over to that 38,750. Then we have the auxiliary enterprises. Make sure you pick up the expense as opposed to the revenue account. That's going to be here. In Q25, something's in it, so I'm going to say F2 plus F2. Scroll over to that 45,000. Then we have the academic support. So academic support expense, that's in cell Q22. So I'm going to say F2 plus F2. Scroll over to that 14,850. Finally, we have accumulated depreciation. Going to scroll back up top to pick up the accumulated depreciation. So here we have the equipment and the accumulated depreciation in Q9 equals, and we're going to scroll down and pick up the 98.6, and that brings it up in the credit direction. If we scroll back down, we should then be back in balance. So that's it for number 11. If I scroll back over, we're going to say number 11 has been picked up. And I'm going to ungreen that. The next thing we're going to do will, of course, be the closing entries. That's what we'll do next time.